Welcome back to the Relationship Series, Season 8, Episode 6. Girl, leave that mediocrity alone. I'm your host, Genevieve, and here today we are going to be talking about calling ourselves to a higher standard. Now, we don't end up in mediocrity by accident. We end up there by our consistent neglect of our standards or not living up to our standards. Now, I often say that we can teach, we can coach, we can train people how to treat us. The way that people treat us is usually not random. It's often a reflection of what we've made room for, either on purpose or subconsciously. Some of us aren't mistreated because we don't know better, but we're being mistreated because we keep overriding what we do know. So we know better, but we don't do better. Now, I want to define mediocrity for us, and I also want to make it personal. I want us to look internally first because our tendency is to look externally. So mediocrity is the quality of being average or not very good. That's the definition, basically. But to me, mediocrity is what happens when our standards don't match up with our values. So we have desired values for how we want to be, but our standards, our level of living, doesn't align with that. So it can show up anywhere. It can show up in how we treat ourselves, how we treat others, how we treat our jobs. When it comes to our relationships, we can look at our families, we can look at our marriages, we can look at our friendships, we can look at our relationship with God, how we treat our bodies, how we treat our futures, our hopes, our dreams, our desires, our growth. All of those things can fall under the umbrella of mediocrity, meeting of standards, values. Now, today I want to specifically focus on how we call ourselves to account, how we commit to ourselves, how we set standards for ourselves, and then how we uphold those standards in spite of outside influences, outside or external factors, and other energy that might be coming our way. I want us to look at things that we can do to level up. Let's start with what happens when we consistently lie or make excuses for ourselves in important areas of any areas of our lives. I'll break it down. For example, accepting when what we say does not match what we do. Oh, I'm all about quality relationships and I never do anything to improve my relationships. When there are blatant gaps or double standards in our lives, for example, change, success, growth is possible for everybody else except for me. I hold on to this fantasy or this fallacy that I'm alone or that I'm unique in this human experience. That can be an area where we are consistently making excuses for ourselves and accepting mediocrity. Another area is when we want or expect others to treat us with dignity, respect, integrity, but we don't treat ourselves with dignity, respect, or integrity, or we don't treat others with dignity, respect, or integrity. We can yell, scream, lie, cheat, steal, call names, insult because we're mad, we're angry, we feel attacked, we feel threatened, we feel judged, but other people can't do that to us. Don't anyone else dare. We can't accept that, but we can do that. Or we can talk to ourselves in a particular way. Oh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I fell for that. I can't. But other people couldn't talk to us that way. If someone else said that, we'd be completely offended. And appropriately so. But again, we're looking at this incongruence, this dissonance between what we call ourselves to and then what we allow in our lives or what we allow or tolerate or expect from others. So another area is when we can tell white lies or harmless untruths, as we call them, or even lies of omission where we don't fully disclose, but we expect complete honesty and full disclosure from others. That is another area where we don't necessarily call ourselves to account, and we make excuses for ourselves. Well, it doesn't really matter. It's not that important. It's not going to affect the bottom line at the end of the day. The truth is, what we say and do affects the people around us and affects our lives. Over time, we see the impact and the results of our actions or our inactions. They bear fruit. These are seeds that we plant, and they bear fruit in our lives. Another area that I notice is that most of us will look externally, but I want us to look inside when it comes to judging this mediocrity thing. Girl, leave that mediocrity alone. In relationships, this can look like examining how we are contributing to the relational dynamic. It may be a dynamic of abuse. It may be lack of trust. It may be decrease in sense of connection or intimacy. It may be inconsistency that exists in the relationships. Sometimes we're hot, sometimes we're cold, sometimes we're close, sometimes we're far. Sometimes we're in clear and consistent communication. Sometimes there's distance and we don't really know what's going on. How do we participate in co-creating a desirable or unpleasant dynamic using ourselves, how we present, how we show up, how we decide to be in the context of that relationship? That is the question we're asking, because we can decide how we're calling ourselves out of mediocrity, showing up in ways that are complacent, that are lackadaisical, that aren't fully engaged, fully present, fully pursuant of the quality of that relationship. And if I were to step back, I would say, are we accepting mediocrity in the standards that we are setting and upholding for ourselves? And have we thought about this? Or how much have we thought about this? I can share what I discovered during my involvement in abusive relationships. At one point, I had a conversation with my spiritual director, and I was lamenting on wanting to get married again. Men were milling around. None I wanted to entertain deeply. They were nice. They were not a match for me and what I was looking for in my life. Yet, I answered the texts. Yet, I went on the dates. Yet, I went on the trips. Yet, I spent time. Yet, I gave time, energy, effort. I gave part of my life to these relationships, even though I knew that they were not for me in terms of what I actually wanted, which was marriage. So at one point I said to her, like, why am I even entertaining these guys? Like, there's this feeling of exasperation. The feeling of exasperation was with myself, because it reminded me of the aftermath of being in those abusive relationships. I was like, what in the world am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Why am I entertaining this? And myself and my spiritual director, we got to work on uncovering, peeling back some of the layers, and finally revealed this sort of long-standing trend or pattern in my life of self-negation, this core belief that my needs or my feelings mattered very little and less than those of others, and particularly or specifically these men in these romantic relationship contexts. So if I take a step back and I share, I grew up in a cultural and religious environment that promoted self-denial and self-control. So it looked like stifling unapproved emotions. Don't be angry, don't be sad, don't be broody, don't be moody, don't be shameful, don't be anything that's not approved. Come through, be joyful, be happy, be blessed and highly favored. And I learned quickly that my feeling bad was not a matter of concern, not a matter of urgency. And that was like, okay, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. And it would get me relegated to the corner to fix my face really, really quick. Comfort was given sparingly, while other forms of responding to my feelings were more acceptable and more frequent. Lectures were frequent. Licks were doled out in abundance. But that sense of comfort and affection and telling me that my feelings were okay wasn't the go-to. It wasn't the majority of the time. Overall, I learned that I should get back to the business of feeling good as quickly as possible. Or I could risk more space and time apart from that sense of belonging and approval and acceptance. And so, because I don't like to be alone and excluded for too long, I would fix my face and suppress my feelings and then get back to the business of feeling joy, excitement, happiness. What I know now is when others don't attend to our emotions, we often end up learning how to minimize ourselves and our emotions. If we are denied the affection that we need and the response that we're looking for, which is affirmation, acceptance of the feelings, working through all that kind of stuff, if our feelings are dismissed, we tend to learn how to deny and dismiss ourselves, and we deny and dismiss others. It's a pattern, it's a cycle, it continues. We mimic or model what is modeled for us, and we do that to ourselves and to others. I actually learned this in relationship with others when I started asking them how they experienced me or how they received me. And many would say, oh, I sometimes experience you as dismissive of my feelings, as judgmental of my feelings, as critical of my feelings. And I realized that this is actually the way that I treated myself. I was dismissive of myself, judgmental towards myself, critical towards myself. But that's what it was modeled for me. That's what I learned. That's how I was treated. And so I thought that was okay. That's what I know now. That back then, growing up, obviously, I wouldn't have language for this or knowledge of this. When my feelings and needs are constantly invalidated, I learned that my feelings and needs do not matter or matter very little. I may stop sharing. I may deny that they exist. I may suppress them. I may repress them. I may project them. I may turn to meeting the needs of others in an effort to rescue myself or give others what I don't have or I didn't get. There are many ways to respond, but the point is the invalidation process turns into a self-invalidating process. Now, in relationships, I learned that my tendency was to make myself smaller. Specifically relationships with males, I learned to make myself smaller. I would wonder why I kept sort of ending up with these insecure men. I labeled them as insecure, with these insecure men who needed for me to be small or who were okay with me being small. And that fed my already well-ingrained tendency to treat myself and my emotions with neglect or with disregard. And again, we're calling ourselves to account. We're calling ourselves to a place of realization, awareness, and empowerment. And so I'm looking at how I accepted mediocrity in the way that I presented myself, in the way that I showed up in these relationships. The relationship dynamics had similar elements: power imbalances, manipulation, insecurity. These are elements of the relationships that I was in. There was harm. And when I look back, I see the disapproval and the criticism of my lifestyle and of my aspirations very clearly. At the time, I wouldn't have been attending so closely to how I felt when some of the comments were made or some of the behaviors were done. For example, I remember a time where I was dating a guy and I said I was going to go back and get my degree. He was like, "Why are you going back to get your degree?" It wasn't a question of like, "Oh, tell me about your thought process and what's that going to do for you? How's that going to enhance your life?" It was more of like, "Why would you do that? Like, why do you need more degrees?" At the time, it was more of a, "Oh, well, yeah, maybe I'll think about that." But looking back, when I realized what I actually want and what I actually need and what feeds me in the context of relationship and how I want to fuel and feed others with encouragement and positivity and so on, I realized that I was very disregarding of the feelings that came up. I felt minimized. I did. But somehow that was very familiar to me. I've had comments around my education. I've had comments around what I do with my time. I've had comments around not being able to give enough time because I travel a lot. And instead of noticing and honoring how I felt, and then immediately labeling some of these comments and these behaviors as harmful, I tended to try to understand and to offer grace, to be gracious, to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I look back now and I see that as a guaranteed recipe for mediocre relationship. When there's this denial of self and this tendency to lean towards graciousness, and that's graciousness in accepting behaviors and words that are harmful, that are painful. I offered grace where I should have enforced boundaries, really. I wasn't confused. I was just doing what I had practiced. I practiced to override my own feelings or to dismiss when I felt bad. And that can only last for so long. Thank God. My breaking points came pretty quickly. I'd say under 2 years max for any of those relational contexts. And something happens when I wake up. I've reached this sort of maximum pain threshold where I'm not willing to give the benefit of the doubt anymore or be gracious anymore. I'm at my max and I tap out. I'm tired of feeling hopeless, angry, upset, in pain. I'm just tired of not having my needs met. I'm tired of pouring out and not getting or feeling empty. I'm at the point. And I was tempted in many ways and at many points to ask the question, why did they do this to me? I know many of us ask that question, especially in the context of relationship where we are harmed. Why did they do this to me? Why did they treat me this way? But in my recovery and in my self-reflection, and especially in doing this self-empowerment work, now I ask what I believe is a more powerful question, which is, where did I fail myself? Where did I neglect to set and uphold a standard for how I wanted to be in relationship? Did I set out to be a punching bag for someone? Did I set out to be voiceless, non-expressive, closed, invulnerable, non-vulnerable, whatever the word is? Did I set out not to be a full participant in this relational context? Did I set out to be afraid of losing this person? Did I set out to feel alone? Did I set out to be hypervigilant? I remember one relationship where I became a phone checker. Did I set out to be a phone checker, to not have trust for my partner, the person that I'm deciding to spend my life with? Did I set out to not trust this person and then act in ways that were against who I wanted to be? Right? I became a phone checker. Like, no, I'm not trying to do that. I don't want to be someone in a relational context where I need to constantly be checking your phone because I don't trust you. If I don't trust you, then we need not to be in a relationship. Right, Jen? I had to say to myself, wait a minute, Jen, if you can't show up with trust and with joy, do you want to be here? Girl, leave that mediocrity alone. This is where I realized my words weren't doing that much. Our words teach people how to treat us only when we are willing to enforce those words. So say what we mean to ourselves first and then to others, and enforce what we say. So here's an example. When you violate my stated or expressed boundary, I will give you 2 chances, and then I will enforce my stated or clearly expressed consequences for violating or crossing my boundary. So if I say that, then I have to enforce it. Example, I was in a relationship with this guy. He had, I call it like extreme withdrawal response. Sometimes people check out emotionally, they shut down, there's silent treatment. Sometimes people leave or cut off physically. This is like extreme withdrawal, like ghosting is like extreme withdrawal. Anyway, we won't talk about that today. When it comes to intense conflict or heightened emotion in the context of relationships, some people check out and then some people lean in. So he was an extreme withdrawer. And so every time we got into like an argument or whatever, he'd be like, I'm leaving this relationship. And then like an hour later, he'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry, whatever. So I shouldn't say every time. It happened the first time. And then I said, this is a boundary for me. I don't want to be in the context of a relationship where I can't trust you to hash it out with me. Hey, let's rock together and figure things out. You just have high anxiety and you dip. So I was very clear. The first time I said, I'm giving you grace because I understand extreme withdrawal. The second time it happened, I said, I'm not doing this again. Because if I can't trust that you are willing to be present with me in this relationship and work through any kind of conflicts and differences, then I can't trust you to be a part of my life long term. If it happens again, I'm not giving you another conversation. There will be me saying, I'm out, and I don't revisit this conversation again. So said, so done. It happened again. And I said, okay, I'm good. Oh no, wait. Now I have a choice. Do I violate my stated and expressed boundary by not clearly enforcing it, or do I go back on my word? Well, we're not doing this break up and get back together foolishness. So I now have to clearly and expressly enforce my boundary. And I do that for myself first and then with others. If I was unwilling to do it with myself, then I would likely be like, okay, sure, let's go back and forth. And but then I'd be questioning myself. Why am I taking this? Why am I accepting this? So example for myself, the other day I apologized to my friend's son for crossing the line and for being rude to him. I embarrassed him in public. I don't always notice when I do this, but when I do notice, I enforce. So I say, Jen, if you treat somebody a particular way, you offend somebody, and then you realize you notice, then your job is to apologize. You admit, you acknowledge, you apologize. Your pride could be at stake. Your ego could be at stake. If you know you did something that was offensive, that was wrong, that crossed a line, that hurt somebody else, if it's friend, foe, family, if it's a child, if it's an elder, if it's an adult, your job, when you realize, is to apologize. Now, that's my standard for myself and how I want to show up. So regardless of what's going on, well, that person doesn't deserve it. Well, they were mean to me first. None of those things matter at that point. You have an enforced standard for yourself, Genevieve, and you will act accordingly. So that's what I did. Now, let me address this grace thing. For me, grace without these boundaries or without these enforcements becomes like permission. It becomes like an open door to accept all kinds of harm and treatment. Grace is not meant to be a replacement for self-respect. If I give space for 3 chances, that's grace. If I give chances without seeing changes, then that's acceptance. If I give unlimited chances without seeing transformation or changes, then that's an invitation to continue to hurt me and to treat me badly. I'm asking myself if that's really what I want to do. And so I'm asking you to ask yourself, how do you want to show up? How do you want to be? What kinds of rules and standards do you want to enforce for yourself and for others? This is, girl, leave that mediocrity alone. It's a personal mandate. So where do we start? Step 1, we want to identify our values. We have to have standards, and that comes from our values. My top 2 values are faith and transformation, which captures my purpose, my passion, which is to challenge myself and others, which is to execute on the things that I love to do. I always say it, from the page to the stage. I love like a dream, an imagined thing coming into real life. When it comes to a blueprint on a piece of paper for a building that's going to be created, I love that. When it comes to a play, I used to write productions, and you write the script and you write each character, and then you do the casting, and then you see this thing come to life, and then you got the lights and you got the backdrop, and it's amazing to me. So that piece of execution, that creativity, that's a value for me. Seeking truth, seeking healing, seeking growth. Faith and transformation are my top 2. Everything falls under that umbrella. When I translate my values into standards, I can easily say no. So if you value growth, for example, I value growth as well. So I would find environments, activities, communities where I can learn, I can be challenged, I can evolve, I can expand, I can get different perspectives and different ideas. If I value faith, for example, then I would say no if I'm being asked to, say, compromise stewardship of my body, of my money, of my time, in a way that does not honor God. I don't need to negotiate. No, this doesn't align with my values. This doesn't align with my standards for life. I can say, girl, leave that mediocrity alone. So we identify our values. What are our top values? Then we translate those values into our standards. So behaviors, actions, how we're going to engage and interact with the world, with ourselves, with others. Then we look at the values and how they translate to our lives. So this is like on the ground evaluation, because our values don't mean anything if our lives don't reflect them. Consistently asking, like, what are my values? Where are my current actions and behaviors contradicting those values? Where am I tolerating from myself behaviors, actions? What am I tolerating from myself that no longer aligns with those values? That's an evaluation process. Step one, you want to identify the values. Step two, you want to connect your values to your standards and behaviors. And then step three, you want to evaluate. Am I aligned in what I'm saying, what I'm doing? I don't say this from a place of pride. You guys know me. I don't talk about things that I'm not going through, that I haven't gone through. And so I say it from a place of experience, because I keep asking myself daily, where am I accepting mediocrity for myself? Where am I accepting mediocrity from myself? And then level up. Choose to level up. Most of us don't accept mediocrity consciously. It's not like, oh, yes, I'm going to accept mediocrity today. We tend to fall into mediocrity because we are avoiding pain. We may not want to face the truth because the truth is hard. We may want to contort or adapt ourselves in order to fit in, to gain belonging, to gain approval, to gain acceptance. We may tolerate things or stay because we're afraid of being alone. All of these responses or survival techniques, coping mechanisms, all of that can create mediocrity in our lives subconsciously. And then one day we wake up and we realize, like, we've built this life that doesn't even reflect who we want to be. And then we're like, oh, wait, hold on. Girl, leave that mediocrity alone. And I will post the list of self-awareness questions in the comments so that we can do some of this reflective work. That's what I want to leave you with today. Girl, leave that mediocrity alone. Call yourself to a higher standard and see your lives flourish, your relationships flourish, and yourself flourish. All right. Next week on the Relationship Series is the season 8 finale. And this will be me challenging myself to, girl, leave that mediocrity alone. And I will be inviting you guys into my process. Now, if you've been here for any length of time, you'll know that I tend to invite people into my end or my conclusion. So this is what I've worked on. This is what I've accomplished. This is what happened. These are the results. And so I speak from this sort of place of having already done, achieved, or accomplished, which sometimes denies others the opportunity to see what I've gone through, to see what's happened, to see the steps that I've taken, or to be with me in the steps that I've taken, or to support me in the steps that I've taken, or for me to receive support in the steps that I've taken. And sometimes it can look like this thing just unfolded or just happened overnight. It's like a before and after picture. Like, before I was 300 pounds, now I'm 150 pounds. And you see the before and after picture, but you don't see the 3 years of struggle and work in between, right? So we kind of miss all of the moments of struggle and stress and hardship and faltering and falling and fumbling and tripping and getting back up again and overcoming and all that like hard work stuff. So this will be me inviting you into my process, and this is actually the beginning of a process. So next week we will be talking about, girl, leave that mother wound alone. So I'm inviting y'all into my process in real time before I have everything figured out. And I want you to join me. I'm your host, Genevieve, and it is an honor to transform with you. See you next week.